Picking up your box dinners over there for this evening's presentation. So tonight we have with us the City Council, the Planning and Zoning Commission, and our TIF Commission. And what I'd like to do is, some of you might not know each other in the room. I'm going to go ahead and hand the microphone off and have everybody introduce themselves and what commission or what position you have with the city, if you would, please. And I'll start with Mr. Ackland here.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Calvin Ackland. I'm with the Planning and Zoning Commission, Ward 4.
Hello, Jim Peterman, Planning and Zoning, Ward 2, and a real fan of City Council.
Joe Burke, former Planning and Zoning City Council, Ward 2.
Stephanie Como, TIF Commission.
Jerry Faulkner, Planning and Zoning Commission, and never have moved up to City Council. You all left me behind.
Patrick Clark with the TIF Commission, a real fan of the mayor's.
Reginald Townsend, City Council, Ward 1. Fan of everybody, I guess.
I'm Kevin Barber, City Council, Ward 3, and I'm a fan of Raymore.
Jay Holman, City Council, Ward 3. I'm a Chiefs fan.
Jonathan Zur, City Attorney.
Melody Armstrong, Planning and Zoning, Ward 4. Fan of chicken.
John Berenson, City Councilman, Ward 4. I'm a fan of sub sandwiches tonight.
Mike Wilson, I'm with the TIF Commission. Welcome. And I'm a Royals fan.
I'm Sean Dawson. I'm with South Metro, Chairman of the Board for South Metro, and I'm a fan of first responders.
Hi, I'm Brian Pettengill with Raymore Peculiar Schools.
Hi, I'm Sonia Abdelgawad. I'm Ward 4 Council Member.
Matt Wiggins, Ward 3 Planning and Zoning.
Kelly Pfizer, Ward 1, Planning and Zoning.
Mario Urquia, Planning and Zoning, Ward 2. Fan of kids, apparently, because I've got 6 of them.
Hi, Dale Jacobson, City Councilman, Ward 1, and fortunately, a former member of the TIF Committee.
Janet 80 from 80 Advantage. I'm your speaker tonight.
Good evening, Chris Mollendorp, Cass County Collector of Revenue and new member of the TIF Commission.
Hi, I'm Lisa Franklin, and I'm with Evergy.
I'm Mike Eakey. I'm the Assistant City Manager.
Jim Fearborn, I'm City Manager.
David Gress, the Director of Economic Development for the City of Raymore.
James Cataret, Director of Development for the city.
I think that's everyone. So tonight, we're going to have, as Janet introduced herself, she's going to be giving us a presentation tonight. So please enjoy your dinner as she goes forth and enlightens us on several issues. So Janet, if you want to come on up to the front here. Thank you all again for being here tonight, and we're looking forward to this. You have a microphone on, don't you?
I do. Can everybody hear me? I think we're being recorded, and so it's an important element, even though it's a relatively small room, that I'm on tape. So I believe the camera's over there, so if that's your good side, you're in good shape. If not, don't face toward the back. I'll start to wonder what you're up to. All right. So I appreciate the introductions, Mayor and Jim and Jim. David, welcome to the Economic Development Team officially. This is pretty exciting. As I was getting ready for this presentation tonight, I obviously spent some time with Jim, and I spent some time with the other Jim and the mayor to just kind of get a lay of the land here, because a lot of times when city councils call me out on a Monday night to talk about economic development, there's something wrong. But I don't sense that that's the case here. I sense that this is a place that there's a lot of really good stuff going on, and that you're just energized and want maybe some guidance and discussion about how to do it better. And so this whole idea of high-performance economic development is absolutely right. And I'm going to give away a little bit of the punchline right now. I'm just testing out to see where I can walk without the feedback. So I'm just kind of testing out my boundaries here. So I'm going to give you just a little bit of a harbinger of what's to come. I think that there are three key fundamentals in economic development that really differentiate the haves and the have-nots, if you will, those high performers from the mid-range performers. And these are the three factors: alignment, readiness, and differentiation. And of those three, 9 times out of 10, alignment is the one that's not only the toughest to do, but has the greatest impact. And so the fact that we've got the TIF board members here tonight, the Planning and Zoning Commission members, and the City Council members here, all under one roof, is an extremely good sign. Now, you all know each other mostly, right? Right. Did you notice, let's have a show of hands to the Planning and Zoning people. They're all wearing plaid. That's how I'm going to keep them straight. Everyone wearing plaid is Planning and Zoning. There's one or two different. Yeah, there's one or two different. But it was really fun as I went around the room because it was Planning and Zoning, Planning and Zoning, Planning and Zoning, TIF. Planning and Zoning, TIF. It was really kind of fun. So it was a pattern there from the beginning, and that's how I'm going to use to simplify exactly who it is that we're talking to here. Okay, so another thing that I would like to say, you see my logo up here, you also see Evergy. So this program would not be possible without Evergy, formerly KCP&L, who has retained us to not only develop this new curriculum, but also to come out here on a Monday night and present it to you. So thank you very much, Lisa Franklin and your team, kind of the quiet, silent partners in economic development for the greater Kansas City region. So very much greatly appreciate that. The other thing I will say is that in our time together, although I have a billion slides and I could talk forever, I won't. I want you to know that this is your time. And if there are things that we want to talk more about, we can do that. And if there's things that we want to gloss over, we can do that as well. Because it's really, I'm here for you. I'm not here just to crank out slides and say that I'm done. I'm really here to make sure that, we can discuss the issues that are important to you and continue to move the ball forward here for the city of Raymore. Is that fair enough? All right. We have two microphones. I think they're both back there. And so when you do ask questions, they're going to ask if you could speak to the mic because of the recording situation. So not so much because we can't hear each other, but just so that it's official as an open records meeting, as my understanding. So just some of that. So again, the agenda here looks pretty overwhelming, but it'll be fun, you guys. It'll be awesome. Because we're going to be talking about economic development, which is like one of the best topics in the world. So we're going to start with that first chapter on economic development, and that, truthfully, will be the most participative. So I'm going to have a couple open-ended questions and some things for the group. Then we're going to talk, if you like, I would suggest we maybe go into traditional economic development. We could talk about the site selection process, what that's like from an industrial marketing perspective, move into some branding and industrial marketing if you would like to do that. But then I want to talk about how economic development is changing and basically expanding. So, and again, I want to give you a little bit of an idea of where I'm going with this. And so what I mean by that is that in the old days, it was literally, if you build it, they will come, right? It was literally the economic development guy, his job was to go out and get a nice big business. The employees would follow. They'd all spend money downtown on a Friday night, Saturday night. Then you'd go get another business, and then the employees would follow, and then the community would prosper. But now what's happened, right? Now what's happened is companies are saying, I'm not going to move there unless you can prove that there's people. And the people are saying, I'm not going to move there unless I can get a good quality of place, really good place that I want to live in. And so we see this dynamics, right, of those three elements of community, employer, and employee kind of changing and going a different direction. And the end result of that is that we still have to do industrial development. We still have to do all that. But now we have to take into consideration things that impact talent, right, like housing, like broadband, like childcare, like transportation. Those things are all now falling under the umbrella of economic development because if we don't have them, they're a barrier to growth. Okay, so anyways, that's what economic development reimagined is, and then I'll talk about what impact that has on strategic planning, what impact that has on performance metrics, and what impact that has on marketing. So that should keep us busy for a while. All right, so I am going to move forward with the next slide. A little bit about us. I apologize. A little bit about us. So I founded AD Advantage in 1993. I'm sorry, 2003. I get my decades mixed up. 2003. I didn't mean to misspeak. In that period of time, we've worked with over 500 economic development groups. We have a strong base here in the Midwest, especially in Missouri and Kansas. I think partly that's because I teach at Heartland every year, and David is going to be a good candidate, Lisa, so sign him up. But the Heartland Economic Development Institute is held each April in Blue Springs, and it teaches the best and the brightest of new economic development professionals about the economic development world from 6 neighboring states, Missouri and Kansas, and 4 others. And I also teach the basic course, it's called, at 4 other states. I get out and about. I'll be at Kansas Economic Development Association speaking tomorrow, and I'll be at the National Rural Economic Development Association on Wednesday. So we appreciate them scheduling their meetings in conjunction with yours. So, but anyways, that's kind of what we do. We also work with companies in terms of site selection, and so with that equation, we get both sides of the table, if you will. We can understand what both parties are looking for. Okay. The kinds of things that we do back in our shop, I'm based in Madison, Wisconsin. We work on a lot of strategic questions, so the strategic planning, the talent initiatives, the developing industrial sites, and all that kind of good stuff. And we do that with 3 functional areas. We have research in-house, we have communications and branding, positioning, kind of the strategy piece, and then also the marketing communications piece in terms of how do you translate all of that. Because we were finding that we were so good at the research and the positioning, we'd hand it off to the local agency, and then they just wouldn't understand economic development because it's so different than any other kind of B2B or B2C client for that matter. These are some of the groups that we've worked with here in the state of Missouri. Spent a lot of time on the ground here. Was happy enough to speak at the Missouri Economic Development Governors Conference in early October this year as well. All right, enough of that kind of stuff. As I said, I don't want to just talk at you. I want to understand kind of where you're coming from and what issues are important to you. So let's start off with a little discussion about what is economic development. And I've asked David to assist. He's going to be helping with the microphones. But we'll also be kind of taking track of what you say as far as what is economic development. Okay. And now this is my chance to call on the people at the back of the room, right? Because my last name's Ady. I didn't change it when I got married. And I always had to sit in the front of the room. And so we're going to go back here with some of the troublemakers. What is economic development? Who's going to start? Ma'am? No wrong answers, so not trying to put you on the spot, but let's get an idea of kind of where people are coming from.
Bringing in development that spurs economic growth.
Good. Development that brings economic growth. That's right. You get to pick who's next. That's right.
Awesome. Obviously, yeah, growth that brings in revenue, not only to make the city bigger, but to make it better for the residents that live in that city.
Make it better for the residents as well. Excellent. You had a twitch in your hand, so she's in.
Something now. I think it's the development of businesses and I guess businesses that help kind of determine what your city is about, or the types of things that your city is about.
So growth in businesses that helps determine the types of things that your city is about. Okay, very good.
I would say it's strategic planning in a way that your city is not only prepared for economic growth and businesses to come in, but also the residents that follow, so that your city grows in a way that you want it to, and draws in the people that you are targeting to come and move into your community by attracting the right businesses and mix of businesses to support that plan.
So you had a lot wound up in that. So I heard a couple things. I heard intentionality, so it doesn't just happen. It should be kind of planned. And I heard that it's businesses as well as people. And I heard that it should be kind of thinking about those two together.
Very much so, yes.
Okay.
So from my view, it's usually trying to bridge a gap in a project by providing a public incentive to a private company.
Okay, so economic development can be quite limited in terms of maybe seen as an incentive or something like that.
Right, and I should state I'm with Gilmore and Bell. We're the city's economic development council.
What's that?
We're the city's economic development attorneys.
Oh.
So in our scope, our part of it is usually trying to assist with
Negotiating of that ROI piece.
exactly.
Very good. Okay. Anybody else want to volunteer? Because I'm happy to go around. I think this is very helpful, actually. Here we come. Here comes that microphone and your opportunity to participate.
I think a lot of it starts in this community with education and career and college readiness is a huge part, and then the development allows more money to be put into that to continue that cycling process.
Very good. And why is that educational piece so important? Are you a teacher? And are you with the school district? Is that right? So let's hear what the school district guy says. Because I wanted to wait till you had a mouthful, too.
Well, as Joe's talking about, one of our jobs is to make sure that we have the workforce ready for the development as it comes in, and make sure that we have the population educated to the point to fill those positions.
Has the city of Raymore had any school referendums in the recent history? Have you guys had any school referendums recently? Are you reinvesting in your schools? That's my question. Bonds and so forth? Good, good. As I've done this more and more, that is one of the key questions I ask when I do come on site and do visits. I ask about how are you reinvesting in your schools? Because like you, I have come to understand that if you're not investing in your schools, people with kids, certainly, people aren't going to want to live there, right? Think about when you're looking for a place to live for your family. One of the first questions on your list is, how are the schools, right? And so if you don't invest in the schools, then you can start this whole negative cycle that just occurs. The schools get worse, you don't have enough property tax revenue, and it can just go off the rails pretty quickly. Hold on, we're coming with the microphone. It's coming from behind you.
I don't know if it matters a lot to you. It matters to me somehow. The school district is Raymore Peculiar. It includes parts of Lee Summit. The fire district, South Metro, doesn't align with the city boundaries, the water district. So one of the things, and it just kind of popped a little red flag in my mind, was when we're talking about the schools, it does not align with the city of Raymore. They're all obviously interrelated, but I think because of the history and development out in suburbia, those alignments are all different. They're different entities, and somehow, to me, that's important.
Do all the residents of Raymore go to your school? But that also includes some additional people. Yeah, okay, I understand. Very good. Anybody else with a definition of economic development they want to share? That was very, very good. That was very, very good. I appreciate that there was kind of some consistent themes there in terms of what I heard, at least, was growth. I heard kind of a complementarity of businesses and individuals, both of those. I heard the intentionality. I heard incentives that are aligned with what you want to do. I heard schools, quality of place, that kind of create a foundation for all of these things to occur. Anything else that we would want to add to that kind of definition? I think that was pretty good. That's a very good working definition. Very good. So as I said, there's no wrong answers, right? There's no single definition. A lot of times in the International Economic Development Council, the way that they think about it is in terms of jobs and investment typically. And I'm going to tell you that is a traditional way to think about economic development. And I think that it is necessary but not sufficient maybe to describe what economic development is today The second bullet here talks about it as a process that influences the growth and restructuring of an economy to enhance the economic well-being of a community. So we start to get into more of the community impacts and the community outputs. Because as much as jobs and investment has been kind of the shorthand for economic development in recent decades, right? Things are different now, right? Because I would argue that for some communities, landing a 500-person, $10 an hour operation isn't going to maybe move them forward to where they want to go. I would argue that just jobs and investment isn't enough anymore to say, yep, that's what we want, and that there's some other elements that might have to do with what I call economic mobility, economic equity. So is it making your residents better off, right? Better quality of life for each of them as you improve the community as well. Okay? Excellent. So this slide is also kind of a discussion slide, if you will. As I've gone through and done a number of these economic development 101s, I kind of key in on some of the key issues that come up, and I put them at the very beginning of the presentation so that we can get them out on the table and start talking about them as well. So the first is that, in most professions I think this is true, but there's a lot of acronyms that get used, and I want to make sure that we're all kind of on the same page going in. So in the world of traditional economic development, there's considered to be 3 legs of the stool. Business retention and expansion, which is BRE, that first bullet, business recruitment, and business startup, okay? And so for a long time, those are the 3 traditional legs of the stool, and most of the economic development strategic plans that were written in the 80s, 90s, and the early 2000s would have components of each of these 3 legs of the stool in their plan. So business retention expansion might be we're going to call on all of our existing businesses or of a certain size maybe, all of that kind of stuff. Business recruitment might be we're going to do so many sales calls, or we're going to call on site selectors, or we're going to try to market this industrial property. And then business startup might be that you're going to work with the SCORE or the SBDC or somebody to try to influence a startup of businesses. I mentioned that I speak at Heartland every year, and it's Kansas, Missouri, Nebraska, South Dakota, Iowa, what's the other one? Oklahoma, I want to say? Oklahoma. So those are the 6 states. And every year we organize kind of an instructor's dinner. And every year I ask the lead economic developer from each of those states, what % of your jobs and investment last year were from business retention and expansion versus business recruitment? Okay? And what are the numbers for these good Midwestern states? What % is business retention expansion versus business recruitment? Just throw it out there. Come on, it's early. Front row, come on. Throw something out there. Good. More? Good, a little more. 80-20 and up. So the minimum was 80%, the highest was 97% was business retention expansion. A lot of business comes from existing business in this world of economic development, and it's one of the reasons why having a good business retention expansion program is one of your best strategies to having a good business recruitment program. Why is that, Janet? Because if you've got a good business retention expansion program, you're going to capture a lot of growth that way. Number 2, you're going to pay attention to your existing businesses so that somebody else who's trying to recruit them from outside is going to be less successful. And then number 3, when you do have a prospect, the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to go talk to your existing businesses to say, how are you treated here? So that business retention expansion piece is really an important part of economic development. Okay, we talk about primary employers versus those who follow. So here in Missouri and Oklahoma, Kansas, and a number of other states, there's this thing called sales tax. Sales tax, generally for retail, right? And retail sales tax is good because it feeds the coffers, right? But one of the paradoxes of retail is that they often have formulas in terms of the number of beds or the traffic or whatever that you're either on the radar or you're not. And so it would be very difficult, for example, to go to Jim and say, Jim, we need a Shake Shack here in a Target or whatever it is that you want. unless it meets the income and the household numbers and the traffic counts that those stores require, there's literally very little he can do. Now, on the industrial marketing side, where we call primary jobs, there's a huge influence that he can have to recruit those businesses here because they'll require a labor force, right? But they're looking at the labor shed. So, you know, and you're so close to Kansas City that you're going to have a pretty good-sized labor shed and not be eliminated for most of those kinds of projects. So some of the jobs, primary employers, like when we do a target industry analysis, we particularly look at manufacturing, we look at professional, scientific, and technical, we look at warehousing and distribution, biosciences, and on down the line, because those are primary jobs. So another thing about a primary job is it creates job multipliers. So for example, I come from Wisconsin. For every cheesemaker, it generates 8.2 other jobs. Because a cheesemaker is like the main person in a cheese factory. So that's a pretty high job multiplier. Typically with manufacturing, it's a 1 or a 2 times as many jobs as itself. Whereas with like a retail operation, they may create 50 jobs, and that they create 50 jobs. You know, so as you look at the value of some of these projects, you have to look at what the impacts are as well. And with a lawyer back there who just focuses on incentives and that part of the equation, and with an incentives policy that you have, right? You have an incentives policy, I understand. Is that true? Unbelievable. You're in the top 10% right there. So that, I mean, that it seems obvious, right? Why wouldn't you have an incentives policy? It suggests very good stewardship, and it suggests very good alignment. Because a policy is hard to do. It's easier to just go by the hips, and then you'll probably get caught up in yourself too. So having a policy is super, super important. So kudos for you for having that at this point. Okay, industrial versus commercial and retail. I talked about that in primary employers. I kind of conflated those two a little bit. And I gave you a little bit of a clue in this before. Housing, broadband, transportation, childcare. What do they have to do with economic development? When I spoke at the governor's conference, people wrote out, filled out the surveys afterwards, and I was always interested in what's the most interesting thing you learned. And the statement that kind of embodies this for a lot of people was, I am so thankful I went to hear this because I was starting to think I was just losing focus because I'm being pulled in so many different directions these days in economic development. I'm wondering if I need to get back to basics. And so what's happening, as I mentioned before, is that with talent now being a driver for a lot of economic development, we start looking very closely at what the barriers to talent recruitment retention are. And those are, based on my experience in dozens of counties in the last 2 years, number 1, it's housing. Number 2, broadband. Number 3, transportation. 3 and 4, childcare. Those can be tied. But in order of magnitude, those are the big things. And so there's some impacts here on you as a city. So how is your broadband? Pretty good, right? I don't want to blow it off, but my understanding is it's pretty good. Good. If it were not good, you would be way behind the 8 ball. And I was in rural communities last week where it was not good. And here's what's happened in the broadband discussion, just so you can feel a little bit good about this, because you've got it nailed. If you don't have broadband, it used to be like, yeah, we don't have broadband, we got to get to that, just like we have to get to the bridges and the roads and the this and the that. But now it's like, we need to get the broadband right now because people are not moving here today because we don't have broadband. Businesses aren't moving here today because we don't have broadband. So it has become way up on the urgency of rural America. And the problem is to extend broadband services in rural America is super expensive. And so there's not a good ROI. There's not a good technical solution yet, and they need to figure out some kind of funding or technical solution because they're at a real logjam. But now let us move to housing. So what I've seen about housing all across this country is that it's a shortage, right? Did you see in the paper today, the Wall Street Journal, that people are staying in their houses longer? Like 13 years now on average, and as recently as 2010, it was like half that long. And so that ties up a bunch of housing. But here's what I think about from a city's perspective. So for at least 25, 30 years, maybe longer, cities have not had to incent housing. Housing just happened. Developers came out of the woodwork, they made housing happened, right? But now we're finding all across the country that housing is not just happening. That the developers are asking the cities to extend the utilities, where in the past they would kind of front that and then give it back. The cities, in turn, are looking at infill. Now, we drove around here a little bit between when I got in at the airport this afternoon and when the sun set, and we saw some really nice housing here. And I didn't see any blighted housing, and maybe my tour guide just took me around the nice streets. But in some cities that have blighted housing, that's one of the first things they look at. They're like, well, we want to clean up the blighted housing, and it's already served, so let's start with that. So there's some programs that focus on that. But my big macro statement would be that where cities and municipalities haven't been needed to be involved in housing in recent years, now they are, all across the country. So that's a big change, big change. All right, transportation. We're typically talking about public transportation. Certainly we want good roads and all that kind of stuff. But if it's a barrier, so some of the cities that are closer to Kansas City, if you're having service people, for example, from the cities, people who live in the city and work out here, that can be a problem, right? And so I haven't done that analysis for your community, but that could be an issue if people can't get out here. A second one is childcare. And I give you an example of, is there enough childcare? That's one issue. And if there are the openings aligned with the factories, right? And so let's pretend you have a distribution center that opens at 5 in the morning and the childcare doesn't open until 6 or even 7. What is mama going to do or daddy going to do with the babies, right? So it's those kinds of things. And so I've been in communities where they have just efforts focused on aligning the childcare. There's one community in north central Iowa where the Economic Development Group built a child care center. It was that important. So again, when you start to think about what the barriers are, and again, when you're doing your business retention expansion interviews, you'll pick up on some of these trends as well, right? Well, I've got employees, but after they have 2 kids, then one of the parents drops out of the workforce, right? Because there's not child care, those kinds of things. And you start to identify what the most important issues are for your area. Have those issues come up here? Housing, broadband, child care, transportation? For your particular community? Okay. Yeah. Oh, wait, we got to get a microphone. Otherwise, I got to take this off and it'll be awkward.
Thank you. Question, do cities that have a short supply of childcare, do they raise the prices to whatever they want to do? Or is it just a standard?
No, so the question is, have I seen the cities raise the price? Because that would obviously cut the demand. No, because the whole idea is they want people to use a child care so that they can be in the workforce. So they subsidize it. Yeah. And you've seen even employers, large employers are in some communities are creating their own child care on site. Yeah. In the back, there's a question, Mr. David. We're going to keep him hopping tonight. That's right.
On transportation, I know you talked about the ability for people like from the city to come out and make it and come to Raymore to work like those service-oriented jobs where the pay may not align with the housing here. But have you ever seen issues with the ability of the residents to get in and out of the city smoothly and without much bottlenecking?
Suggestion? Yeah.
Right. Because I love Raymore, but I would tell you my biggest thing is that there's only one main, we have 2 main roads out, and one is overused, and it makes it really, really hard to get in and out of the city.
Yeah, what I do see often is communities looking at what their commuting patterns are. So how many people live in Raymore and work outside, and how many people live outside and work in. And then one of the traditional economic development strategies would be those people who live here and work outside, is there any way we can get them to work in Raymore? What kinds of jobs are those? Can we attract those kinds of businesses so that they don't have to commute outside, those kinds of things? So that's a very traditional kind of economic development strategy that's often successful. Not easy, but successful when it is. Yeah. I would imagine, right? I heard, Mr. Jim, you said that you're only 51% built out. That amazes me. That's awesome. And to think that you're here thinking about it and planning it for the next generation. In fact, my definition of economic development is that the next generation has the opportunity to live and work in the city. That means that there's jobs that are qualified for that individual in the city.
Hello. I'm curious about public transportation in terms of busing and things like, bus stops and so forth. What trend have you seen in that, for suburbs that want to transport people to the inner cities for work and so forth?
Or vice versa, yeah. I think that there's increased interest in it. Do we have any millennials here tonight? Our millennials are often driving that as well because it's practical. We don't want to own cars. We want to share, the whole sharing economy thing. So, I mean, I think there's a lot more emphasis on that kind of mobility to get from one place to another in an effective, cost-effective way. Again, it's almost like broadband in that it's expensive. It's expensive. And so that's really the issue. And it's, as you said, Mayor, transportation is generally a regional issue. So an RPC, a regional planning council, or council of governments, or something like that is usually part of that solution. I don't know who the group would be here, Lisa, that does regional planning. Who would it be? Mid-America, Mark, maybe Mid-America Regional Commission. Yeah, a good group, a very good group. So, good. Any other questions on this, on those four? Broadband, housing, childcare, transportation. So again, it starts to show that, the tent of economic development is getting bigger. The role of incentives. In my opinion, incentives are still necessary. I know that in many places there can be pushback on incentives, corporate greed, and all that kind of stuff. The economic development industry is still extremely competitive. And I can tell you that with every one of my economic development site selection clients, there's always 2 or 3 options. It's never like there's only one option that's absolutely going to work. There's always different options. I will also say this, however, and you've probably heard this before, incentives don't make a bad deal good. If it's not the right location, no amount of incentives is going to make it good. If it's a good location, incentives can make it great. And so I believe that as much as there's some changes in how incentives are being communicated and changes in terms of, which is good, right? Increased transparency, for example, increased accountability for the companies, also good. I think incentives are here to stay. That's kind of my bottom line. You want to talk about incentives a little bit, or we can talk about it as a discussion comes along too. We've got people here that are just on the TID committee, for example, those kinds of things. Okay. And then border wars. I don't know if you get into these very much, but around the Kansas City metro area that sometimes occurs because we as site selectors, we think about labor markets, right? We think about labor markets. We don't really think about jurisdictional boundaries, let alone state boundaries. And in fact, having a state boundary in the search territory is advantageous because then we can have 2 states playing against each other, right? So it's advantageous in that regard. I understand that you guys called a moratorium on border rollers. Has that been working? The 2 governors said they were going to do it. You say no. It's too early to tell. Here's the thing. So if you hear, like for example, if you hear a rumor that a company wants to move from Kansas and they're maybe going to look at this side of town, the chances are that if you heard the rumor, it may not be true, but it may probably be too late because those deals are usually pretty clandestine, as you know, and pretty far along for a lot of reasons. So that's one of the challenges with that. And I'm not for border jumping at all. I am not for it at all. There have been times we've been approached, especially in the New Jersey, New York area, just to negotiate for a company who really wants to stay. We won't do it. But that kind of stuff does happen. I'm glad I'm on video. This is awesome, talking about this. Okay, let's move on. Okay, so here's another way to think about economic development. And sometimes this is helpful, especially if you have some of these departments and so forth. Traditional economic development would include business expansion, new business recruiting, retail development, prospecting, site development, incentive development, workforce development, a lot of development going on here, redevelopment, deal structuring, fast track review approval. Some things on the community development side, which again are increasingly becoming part of the economic development world, but housing, education, healthcare, public safety, youth development, cultural development, recreation, volunteerism, organizational membership, planning and zoning, here for that. And then some that kind of are in the middle, tourism, marketing, infrastructure, diversification, entrepreneurship, finance, lobbying, brownfield. So there's a ton of things that can be part of economic development. I understand that here in Raymore you have a team that is led by the mayor, is led by Jim, your group, planners, engineers, zoning, all those kinds of things. So very appropriate given the breadth of the different topics here that it touches. Okay. What are the goals and metrics of your ED program? And so again, the microphone is ready, but the idea here is we just talked about what your definition of it is. So how do you measure the success of it? Should be a line. We got a volunteer. Awesome.
Well, I just from my perspective, obviously you have the city's goal of wanting to drive economic revenue to be able to support whether it's infrastructure expansion, Parks and Rec, etc. But also what the citizens feel that they're going to get out of economic development. We were just joking a minute ago about Olive Garden, because the three things you always see on Facebook is when are we going to get a Red Lobster, an Olive Garden, and a Chick-fil-A? And those are the kind of things that people, the citizens, they don't care about, a new water main or a pump or a water tower or whatever, but those are things that we know, we know that'll contribute to, either bringing in people or bringing in jobs. But the side of it from the citizens' perspective, what are they going to get out of it? Because that's all that, honestly, a lot of them care about, which is understandable if you're on the outside looking in.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a very good point. Because people, I don't think they don't always understand the connections. Why are you investing in a water main? So we can extend service, so that we can get development, so that da-da-da-da-da.
As a native son of this community and an elected official, one of the things that we've got to be mindful of is regardless of what we do, what incentive programs we use, the majority of our citizens still work either in Kansas City or in another state that will remain unmentioned. As a graduate of the University of Missouri, but it's west of here. For us to work and play in the same community, and every community suffers from this, not just Raymore, Harrisonville, Belton, Peculiar, Pleasant Hill. It would be really nice if we could, and this should be the definition of economic development in my humble opinion. I talk to taxpayers every day that are driving 30, 40, 50 miles for a job. If we could provide that same wage or salary in Cass County, that's a win. Because then we can convince them to not drive 50 miles to work, but to drive 2 or 1 or 3. And that is the ultimate goal that we should have, is to have the opportunity for financial gain, income here and not in Lenexa, Olathe, North Kansas City, Liberty, Independence, Lee Summit, Overland Park. That's how we should frame this if we're truly public policy makers for Cass County, Missouri.
Anybody else?
I was going to say, is this on? Yeah. So one of the things that the Cass County Corporation for Economic Development is doing is putting a heavy emphasis on workforce development within the county. And we've been trying to get, and when we've been very successful with the school districts in getting them involved. They've got some great programs, both in Belton and Ray-Pec, with regard to those workforce development programs that they're growing. So it is kind of a hand-in-glove thing with our developers and letting them know how robust that effort is going, so that their workforce numbers grow, and that there is that opportunity to live, work, and play right here in Cass County, in northern Cass County, whether it be Belton or Peculiar or Raymore. And so that is kind of our priority. We talk about it infinitum at every one of our quarterly meetings, and another one's coming up in December. But they have there's just a lot that's going on with that, and our executive director Bill Brown is trying to recruit more businesses and several other school districts within the county to participate in this process. So that also includes like a mentoring program at some of the businesses do exist here in Cass County, or a job shadow or things like that, so that the kids can get interested in what jobs there are here in the area and consider staying here in the area. And that's what we want to do, is we want to retain our businesses, or retain our kids here in our community to fill those spots. So it's growing, the interest is growing, probably not at the level that folks around here would like to see, but Raymore has done a really good job of marketing ourselves for housetops. Now we need business tops in our community, and part of that is bringing in good paying jobs, good businesses, commercial development, things like that that can allow people and our graduates to stay right here, keep our talent here in our community.
That's great. One of the key things there's a number of things that you said there, Mayor, but one of the things that I really want to point out is that talent is a regional issue. Talent is not just a jurisdiction of Raymore, and it makes a huge amount of sense to tackle that at the countywide level. The second thing is that what he said is that you're trying to increase the awareness of the opportunities here for your students, and that's often one of the highest ROI kind of programs you can do for talent, because it's simply connecting the local businesses and the students. It's really simple. No, it relies on the good schools and all that. It leverages the good schools, but it helps increase the awareness of those. The next thing that you want to do is to say, okay, so now we can extend the line that we have, we can connect those two, but now we want to think about where do we want to bend the curve? So what kinds of jobs do we want here in the future? Not just what do we have now, but what kinds of jobs do we want here in the future, and can we support? And then get the schools lined up so that they can help provide that pipeline of talent. My experience has been that the schools are very accommodating. That's exactly the information that they want and they need, and they're usually very responsive to that. So it takes a little bit of that, going back to your point in the back there, about creating, what is that we want to be known for, that can have those higher wage jobs, so we can have the housing and the schools and the other components that we want to keep here. So.
Just kind of call it an outsider's perspective, because I'm newer to the Raymore area, and one of the things that I heard about Raymore and why I kind of ended up here was the schools and the education that my kids got, not so that they could stay here and work, but so that they could go and get those jobs in the city or whatever the case might be. But on top of that, back to his point, that there's so many of us that came here because it's a good school district for our children, and then it put us only 30, 40 minutes away from our job, and that was worth that. The cost benefit of driving 40 minutes to make sure that my kids had a good education was well worth locating here for the affordability of the housing and those things. And so while I think we have the education in place to create talent, why people move here is because they know that the education their kids are going to get is right up there with any other, of the big players in the metro. But the end game is that your kids end up getting a job. And so I think part of the strategy, if what I'm hearing is that we want to create jobs here, it's also going to be an education of the parents and letting them know that, hey, we understand that we have a wonderful school district, that we educate your kids so that they can go out and get a good job. But guess what? We now have those jobs right here, and they don't have to commute like you did. They don't have to do those things. And I think that's where we may have a disconnect currently, isn't in what we're doing to educate our kids, because that's why the majority of people with children move to this area, is the education. It's that there are good paying jobs here. So we've got that in place. We just need to create those jobs and show that you can stay in this town and make the money that you can make anywhere else. And so from my perspective, we're on the right track with education and everything, because that's what draws the people here. And the rooftops, that's what draws the people here. And Kansas City's always been a commuter metro, and so I think the education also lies in the parents, not just the students.
Yeah, it seems to to me like you've got the foundations of strategy in place here, like you said, with the schools, layer in the housing, and then start connecting it with the businesses, and then start thinking about what additional businesses would fit and would help elevate the game for everybody. And you said something else, which is like you don't think the parents understand, the parents know. So we are, right? We're the parents, right? And so it is so true in so many places where, and another whole thing is like, do they have to have a four-year degree to be successful? That whole discussion. And it's usually us, it's our generation that is kind of saying, oh, you have to have 4 years to be successful. And that's not necessarily true either. If you've got good technical or community colleges, those kinds of schools, and you can still make really great money with that. So, I mean, there's a whole discussion about exactly what kinds of futures you want to provide for the kids that graduate from the K-12 as well. So, very good discussion. Good. Anything else on metrics? I'm going to show you a slide that's overwhelming, then I'll kind of boil it down a little bit. Okay, so I talked about, in the old days, jobs and investments. And you can go deep. You can go crazy deep. Just for fun, I would ask different clients, like, what kind of metrics they show to their boards and stuff. And it's everything from, like, you could track people asking for occupational licenses. For example, if you wanted to see how broadband was used and who was working out of their homes, you could have that kind of data in your packet. You could do how many business retention expansion meetings do you have, how many leads do you have, how were they generated. You could talk about how many finalist site visits you were on, and I'll explain what a site visit is in the next couple slides here. You could look at the tax base. There's a bunch of things you could do, typically more tactical, right, that support the more strategic things. And then, as I hinted at before, I think there is kind of this trend toward economic equity and economic mobility, which is, do the people who live here, are they getting a better shake? Are they improving their quality of life? Is there a rung up for everybody? So some of these kinds of ideas are big discussion today. And again, what's changed is two things. Talent is in short supply, so more jobs isn't necessarily good. And then productivity and number of jobs or number of workers isn't necessarily correlated anymore. It's starting to diverge a little bit. And so that kind of shakes the foundation of just those two, jobs and investment, being sufficient to talk about what economic development is happening. Just for fun, I'll tell you one other story. We do white papers every now and then. And one of the white papers we did was on kind of trends and not only measures and metrics, but kind of what communities want. And the word that I didn't hear you guys say yet, that I want to throw out there, is diversity. So a lot of times we talk about economic growth and economic diversity. And maybe that's because you haven't been burned, right, by having one huge employer that went out or something like that. But a lot of times we talk about growth and diversity, kind of trying to make sure all your eggs aren't in one basket. So that might be something else just to put on your radar as far as what your goals might be. Okay. Talk a little bit about the economic development ecosystem. And this is really going to be fun because there's so many people who touch economic development. There's those in the economic development world, and then there's those in adjacent spaces. So maybe, for example, the city manager, Jim, you mentioned that the foundation had a gala here last Saturday night, and they just, I guess, cleaned it up. They were quite a rowdy group, as I understand it. Some of you might have been there. But the community foundation, it's not traditional economic development, but there's probably some shared goals there. They might support certain projects that also have economic development goals, for example. The chamber, the tourism group, those kinds of groups. And then there's other groups that, like Cass County Economic Development, very clearly aligned with just economic development. So there's a lot in this space. A little awareness about utilities. They're often kind of quiet partners. Here in Raymore, we have Evergy, of course. But they do a number of things. They build organizational capacity, so they sponsor training sessions like this. They enhance the readiness for industrial development, and so they provide, in this case, KCP&L in the state of Missouri provides the lowest information systems for free. They're supporting the state's certification program. They serve on those committees. They very much play a part in marketing the region, in generating leads that can then be distributed to the communities, and they might even help the communities identify which sites are the most appropriate and so forth. And then, as I mentioned, they provide tools. So we wanted to quantify this a little bit more because we are a little bit research geeky. And so we had an audience of about 85 site selectors, and we said, hey, what are the best local economic developers doing? What are the best regional economic developers doing? What are the best state ones doing? And what are the best utility ones doing? And I leave you with two pieces of advice. One is that there's plenty of work to go around, so never ever feel threatened by the regional or state utilities, because trust me, there's enough work to go around. And at the end of the day, all economic development is local. You'll never ever be out of the equation because it all comes down to your product, which is sites and buildings. That's what you have to sell. And increasingly, it's talent. And guess what? You're 51% developed, that's 49% undeveloped. So you've got product and you've got people who are highly educated and growing. So this is just kind of an overview of those. I wrote a bunch of blogs on them. I don't know if any of you subscribe to my blog. You might not even know about it. But if you're interested in these topics from an educational standpoint, the blog is good. I promise you it's not a salesy blog, but it's where I try to share all of the stuff that I learned, because I talk to hundreds, if not thousands, of economic developers every year, and I can start to see patterns pretty quickly. So that's my little plug there. Okay, everybody still with us? Anybody need to get water or beverage or anything? You're still good? You're caffeinated? Okay, we're going to roll through this next section, then we'll consider taking a little break. Okay, so we're going to go through traditional economic development. So that's business retention, expansion, business recruitment, business startup. We are going to focus on the business recruitment process, because even though it's only 5 to 20% of the total jobs in investment, it's the highest standard. It's the process that even the business retention expansion companies should be using if they were to make it formal. So we figure if you can hit the highest bar, you'll also be able to use the same kind of framework for your existing businesses. Does that make sense? Yes. Okay. So now let's pretend that you are the CEO or owner of a company that's looking to relocate or expand, and you are considering the greater Kansas City metro area, especially this community called Raymore. What kinds of data, what kinds of information would you be looking for to help you make your decision about where specifically in this Kansas City metro region you might locate? Just start calling them out, and I'll repeat them so they can get recorded. How about that? Median income, access to highways. Those are goals. Taxes, what? Education base, so educational attainment. How good are the schools? How educated are your people? Space, you have sites and buildings. You have utility access, right? Water, sewer, electric, gas, broadband. Growth pattern, what do you mean by that? Is the city growing or is it declining? Great. Safety, public safety. What are the crime statistics? What else? Distance from an airport, excellent. City government, what about city government? Do they get along? That is actually one of the biggest things of all, because if they don't, it's a huge risk. So let's talk about this. I would say that for economic development and site selection, there's 3 categories of location criteria: operating costs, operating conditions, and quality of life. For the engineers and planners in the room, I broke it out a little bit. So operating costs, there are just 5. It's a discrete list. There's no ETC at the bottom. For the others, those are examples. So labor, utilities, occupancy, that's if you're going to own or rent the building, basically. Incentives and taxes, and transportation. What we are doing in our site selection process is we are creating, in our case, what we use is a 10-year discounted cash flow to put Raymore and all the competing communities side by side in a spreadsheet. That is what we are doing. And so we can get a lot of this data ourselves. So we can get the labor data, the occupancy costs, and transportation from our own research, but we're probably going to send out an RFI to ask you for information on utilities and for incentives and taxes, because those are more local. And we're going to put them into our spreadsheet, and we're going to do a whole bunch of machinations to compare your community with all the competing communities, as well as the existing business case of the company, right? So this is what your business case looks like now on those factors. Here's what it would look like if we moved people to these different locations. That's what we're trying to do. We also, though, look at operating conditions. And these are things that don't necessarily have a dollar price to them, but can be hugely important. So not just labor costs, but labor productivity, labor availability. In fact, many surveys would say that for the last 10 years, those two factors have been the single driving criteria for site selection projects. Labor management relations, electric reliability, redundancy, ability to serve, availability and suitability of sites and buildings. These are all fatal flaws if you don't have them. You could be the best community in the world, but if you don't have a site or building for my project, I can't even think about moving there. Availability of incentives, availability of job training, recruitment assistance, interstate access, transportation access. You guys nailed a lot of these. And then quality of life, right? So quality of K-12 education, number one on the list. Colleges and universities, not only for my own kids, but for ongoing training of my employees. Healthcare quality, availability, cost, and diversity of housing. These are all things that factor into the decision. One observation I would make is that in traditional economic development, these first two columns were all that mattered up front. And then when you got to be a finalist, these would often be the determinants. Okay? Now what's happening is that these things are coming into the mix much earlier. It used to be, right, you could just say, show me your available sites and buildings and we'll figure out the schools later. But now it's like, we want to know about the schools, we want to know about distilleries, we want to know about things to do, you know, we want to know about all these other things, and we also want to know about sites and buildings and costs and all that kind of stuff. Okay? So that gives you a good idea of some of the factors that we look at. Okay? All right, this is important as well, because when you do an industrial recruitment, it's the one question, here's one that I ask my students. If you had the opportunity to ask the site selector, or the company even, one question about their relocation or expansion, and it can't be who's the company, because that's usually confidential, what would it be? What would it be? How many employees? What type of business? Okay. And the number of employees is probably going to be listed on the RFI. The type of business should be, but it might not be. But you're right, that would be really important. What other question would you want to ask the site selector or that company? You got one? What do you feel you're going to bring to our city? That's close to what I'm thinking about.
Say, what about our city put us on your short list, or put us on your list of cities to come and visit?
What about our city? Because that'd be interesting to know, wouldn't it? Why did you choose us? The thing that I'm thinking, oh, you got one here? Yeah.
What are you paying these employees?
What are you paying? That'll be public. That'll be out there. Yep.
Is this an initial phase or is there growth potential?
Is this an initial phase or is this growth potential? You guys have been through this a few times, haven't you? Got another one here. What's your long-range plans? Kind of along those lines. Okay. The thing that I was thinking about, those are all very good. The thing that I was thinking about is, why are you looking to relocate or expand? Because if we knew that, we might have a better idea of whether it's a good fit for our community and how we would position ourselves. So let's go through what the 4 major reasons might be for relocation or expansion. Y'all want to guess? Number 1, labor. Availability of labor. Number 2, and these are in no particular order. Number 2, costs, right? Number 3, I call it supply chain. It could be access to supply chain or access to market, so kind of your market orientation. And number 4, weird physical infrastructure. So you need to be next to 2 Class 1 railroads with a deep water port and a 12,000-foot runway or something like that. So let's go through those again. I'll go through them more slowly. And as I go through them, think about whether Raymore would be competitive, not competitive, or neutral, okay? So the first one was access to talent. What are you saying? I see thumbs up. From my gut feel would be thumbs up. Okay. Second one was costs. Neutral, probably neutral to, depends maybe. Neutral to competitive, depends. That's what my guess. I haven't looked at the data. How about access to markets? Anybody close to the central United States? Anybody in a state with 7 of the 7 Class 1 railroads? Anyone near any interstates? You're probably going to be pretty competitive on that one. And then the fourth one, weird physical infrastructure. You have to just cross that bridge when they come up with it because it's always something weird. So in some communities, it's hard to get one of these. Now, in your community, you've got a good 2 or 3 of the 4, right? So you start to think about, number one, which kinds of projects do you want? And then number 2, how do you position yourself differently for that? So for example, let's say that you got an RFI. It's going to come in to Jim. He's going to get an RFI, and it says, we've got 100 jobs, and they're this kind of position in this industry, and they're this wage, and we need this big of a building, and all this kind of stuff. And one of them says, so there's 2 of them. One of them says, and we're moving there because we have access to markets, and the other one says, we're moving there because we want your talent. And how you position your community changes, right? The assets are still the same, but in one, you're going to be talking about those K-12 schools right away. You're going to be talking about other higher education. You talk about your educational attainment rates, your high school graduation rates, all of those kinds of great things. In the other one, that might be access to markets, you're going to be talking about interstate access and rail and all of that kind of stuff. So it helps kind of frame what your response is to some of those things. Now, many of the things that you said, like why were we on the list, what did you think about us, all those kinds of things, those are fair game for after the project is announced. If you got it and if you did not, you should be following up with that site selector to say, especially if you got to the site visit, you should definitely be following up with that site selector to say, hey, we want to do a debrief with you. Just what did you think about our community? Why were we on the list? What could we have done better? Just that kind of process. That can be a very insightful exercise to help you really understand how people from the outside do it. Evergy offers a program kind of modeled on what the state of Missouri does for community competitive assessments, where you can come in and I get to do these actually, so I'm proud of these, but we come in and we do a mock RFI and we do a mock site visit, and then we give you honest feedback. So that's another kind of tool that they have in their drawer. All right, let's talk about the site selection process, which I kindly call the funnel of doom, because at the end of this process, there's just one company that ends up being the location. And so that means that instead of being a site selection process, it's actually a site elimination process, and that your goal is to just not get eliminated, okay? So from my client's perspective, we go through a couple key steps. So we sit down and do objective setting, and those operating costs, operating conditions, quality of life, we run them through the gamut because we want to build a spreadsheet on our client so that we can tell that there's going to be a cost benefit when we make our final recommendation. So we go through all that. At that objective setting, we also often talk about which parts of the country, which parts of the states are we going to include or not include. So there's always an option there to say, well, let's throw Kansas City in, let's throw this in, let's throw that in. That's objective setting. Then we'll do initial location assessments, and we'll do that by secondary research, desk research, internet. So we're not necessarily calling you or letting you know that we're actually searching in this area. So you probably don't even know that we're doing that. We're pulling up secondary data. We'll get really good cost data from our databases. We'll get pretty good talent numbers from our databases. But inevitably, there are a slew of information that we can't get from our databases. And so then we send out RFI, and that's that advanced location assessment. So we'll send out what's called a request for information, and we'll have a brief description of the project, and it typically includes the number of positions, the wages, the size of building, the energy factors. It might include anything unique, like we have to have a highway access within, or railroad, or whatever other elements are in there. So we generally have maybe a page description of the project, and then we're going to ask for the things that we can't get from our data set. So here's what some of those things are. Who are the major employers? Because we want to understand if our competition is there, or if we have customers there, if we have suppliers there, especially those employers in our industry. We also want to understand if it's super concentrated or not, like if we'd be a big fish or a little fish in this market. We want to understand what the local incentives are, because there's not really a database for that. We want to understand what we might be eligible for there. We want to understand what the job training support might be from the state, and what the K-12 schools and higher ed, post-secondary training options might be, because we know that training is going to be ongoing for most of our employers all the time. But those are the kinds of things that we will ask for in that RFI. We'll get the RFI back, we'll run it through our databases, and we'll create a short list. We want to know what sites and buildings you have, actually, that fit our project. And then we will determine from there which is on our short list. And our short list, we tend to have 6 to 12 communities, and we might have, 6 to 12 sites within each of those. So it gets pretty competitive. When we go on site, we typically narrow it down to no fewer than 3 different communities. And again, there might be multiple sites within each of those. And so if you get a site visit, you've already made it through a lot of the hoops, and then we go into the negotiations. So that's just kind of an overview of the process. Does that make sense? Okay. I'm going to go through a couple slides here, and I think I built them out and also gave the slides to Jim, so if you would like copies of these, he can get these for you. But just tried to spell out very clearly what the conclusion and implications are, and I've got 5 or 6 sets of these that I'll kind of go through. So there is a chance to influence which states or regions a company and site selector includes in its initial set of locations at that objective setting. It's particularly effective when done, like, for example, by Missouri Partnership or by Evergy at that level. It doesn't usually make sense to do it at the community level, but the implication might be if you are doing business recruitment, it might make sense to stay close to Missouri Partnership and Evergy, because they'll go on trips and they'll have opportunities for you to tag along with them, much more impactful. This is kind of fun, isn't it? Woo, okay. Every project starts with a search for an available site and or building. So again, I mentioned before that that's your product in economic development. And so if that's true, make sure that you're providing current information on those, and use your lowest, which is made at no cost here in the state of Missouri. Make sure that you've got your product on their website. Make sure that the listings are up to date. It seems so basic, but if you don't have it there, we don't know that it exists. And we may just say, you know what, let's not even go to the Missouri side of Kansas City, because they don't show anything that's in the property that we need. Silly. It's free, you should do it. It's a great tool, and we use it as site selectors. Third, using data that shows regional assets, not just those in your specific community, can help your community from getting eliminated. So as we go through this process, we often have a minimum in terms of labor shed. And so you can say, well, we're a population of 20,000 people, and maybe your labor force is 10,000 people, and maybe our low criterion is we need 12,000 people. So just off the bat, we would say no. But if you said, we're a community of 20,000 people, we have 10,000 people in the community who work, and we can prove to you that our labor shed is actually higher because we have 30% of our labor shed that goes out of the state, out of the city every day, and those could be captured here, and so we have actually a bigger labor shed plus other people that could come in. So you want to present regional information, not just on the labor shed, but also on schools, cultural amenities, recreational amenities, airports, blah, 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 all the way down the line, just because aggregating that information always makes you look better. Okay? There are 2 times a site selector will visit your website. The first is when she is trying to decide whether to put your location in, and the second is, if you pass that one, when they're doing a deep dive on their particular project. The parallel to that would be when you're developing your website, it would be awesome if the information were organized so that there's one that says like a community profile and lists kind of that high-level information about who the major employers are, the transportation infrastructure, all this kind of stuff, education, school, healthcare. And the second one maybe was organized by target industries, so that if I'm working on a manufacturing project or a distribution project or an office project, I can drill into what your business case is for each of those types of sectors. That makes sense? It just supports kind of how I'm thinking through the process from the site selection point of view. Any questions on that? All right, let's do some more of these. Site selectors use state, utility, and or regional economic development partners to serve as the point of contact. So regionalism is in. Regionalism is not going to go away. It makes sense, right, if you think about the RFI process, because I want to have a single point of contact, because I don't know if Raymore's in, or Belton, or Peculiar, or at least Summit, some of these other ones you named. I don't know exactly who's going to be in the finals, and I can't reach out to each of these communities. It would just be too cumbersome. But if I can call a John Engelman or a Lisa Franklin from Evergy, or a Jill McCarthy from the KCADC, or a Subhash Alias from Missouri Partnership and say, here's my project, can you make sure that the people who should be responding are responding? That works really good for me, right? And they can kind of, you know, beat the cages and make sure that those communities that have appropriate locations are submitting those. So that makes really good sense for me. That works good. Here's another one. 90% of an RFI response can be anticipated. So as much as you're going to get them from left field and they're going to be all shapes and sizes, when you really look at the data that they're requesting, it's very predictable. And so my implication of that is that you should have that information pulled. And David, if you go to Heartland, I'll teach you exactly how to do it. But in a pinch, use your lowest database, because the lowest sites and buildings tool, which is free, has a lot of the demographic data in real time through the ESRI reports, ESRI, which is another economic development acronym for, I don't even know what it stands for, some kind of great research that they do. So it has ESRI in it, but it'll have community profiles, demographics, some of the basic stuff that you'll be able to print off really nice reports very quickly about that. And that means, what does it mean? It doesn't mean you get to take the weekend off to watch the Chiefs, who did awesome on Sunday. It means that you get to spend more time crafting your cover letter and your positioning, because you're going to be asking about what is the one reason out of the four that is driving this location, so that you can tailor that cover letter specifically to that RFI, right? And that's going to differentiate you, again, better than 9/10 of them out there. Because most people just fill in the RFI in a spreadsheet and send it in, and that's it. So, okay, communities should work with their utilities to have service capacity and cost information available for the main industrial sites in the service territory. So let's pretend that you have 3 sites that would work for a particular RFI. It's Friday afternoon, it's due. You're going to pick one of the sites, because they only let you submit one. You're going to pick one of the 3 sites because it's the size that they want, and you're going to submit it. Now, if that particular site cannot be serviced or doesn't have enough capacity to serve that need, then the whole city's going to be eliminated. Because we're going to be like, well, you don't know, you submitted a property that's not right, so now we've wasted our time, we don't want to deal with it anymore. So having the utility partner on board to say, is this site serviceable or not, is a worthwhile phone call. And it's not just electric, it's the gas as well, and your water and sewer guys. Any water and sewer guys here? I love water and sewer guys. Okay, so anybody? In our heart, they're here with us, right? Okay, so we were helping a client who wanted to develop a large industrial site. It's like 1,200 acres. And it was on the outskirts of a city, and we knew it was going to be super high profile. And the first thing that we did, this is awesome, we knew it was served by electrical. The first thing that we did is we had the water and sewer guy come in completely under the radar and say, we're thinking about developing this. Could the city actually do it from an infrastructure standpoint? And you could just see, first of all, the relief that the guy had, because it was before any announcements, before any public pressure on him. And he was able to say, I think so, but let me go back and let me run some numbers with my guys and get back to you. And he did come back quickly, and he said, we could do it up to this point, but after that we would have to do something different. So it would be best if you could start on this side of the property and move that way. I mean, it was just, it didn't cost anything, and it saved a lot of potential fatal flaw later. So again, checking in with the utility infrastructure to make sure you're submitting sites that are appropriate is the wise thing to do. Oh, I got one more here. We talk about confidentiality as a given for most site searches. That is not going to change. Amazon HQ2 Phase 1 was an anomaly, but our clients are continuing to be anonymous. Why do they do that? Have you guys thought about this? Why do clients do that? You don't want to offend potential clients or existing customers. Number one, you don't want your competitors to find out that you're thinking about moving, because that could be a competitive advantage. And even more important, you don't want your employees to find out until you know what you're doing. That's the tough part that's tough. And you remember, I don't know how close you guys watch Amazon HQ2, but you remember that one of the newspapers was like counting the number of hits to the Virginia area websites or whatever, and you know, that employees were like looking for land and housing, and I mean, it was a little bit of a cluster. It got a little bit out of hand, and that's another reason why you don't do that. There was speculative buying in New York and some other things, so you just don't want to do that. All right, I have a presentation that goes into the 3 trends of economic development. I'm going to go through them in just a couple moments here, and certainly answer any questions you have. But the first mega trend is minimizing risk, and so one of the things that companies continue to look for is to minimize risk. And the ways to do that is to have alignment and be ready. And so what does alignment and readiness mean? Alignment and readiness means that your council members and the planning and zoning and the TIF committee are all meeting together on a Monday night. It means that if you were a finalist community and we had I had the client with me, and I had everybody here, that somebody wouldn't be throwing the school superintendent under the bus, and the school superintendent wouldn't be throwing the utilities under the bus, utilities wouldn't be throwing blah, blah, blah under the bus. It means that, this is a true story, Mayor, it means that, so I was in one of these things, I love these things, I was in one of these stakeholder meetings, you know, community visits, and one of the council members, there was 5 council members, one of the council members came up to me and said, nobody here really gets along. And I said, what do you mean by that? Because, I mean, people always say it's a great place to live, work, and play. They also say nobody gets along. And she said, well, at the last council meeting, we had to call 911 to break up a fight with the council members. And it was on C-SPAN, too, I think. I mean, it was crazy. So I'm like, yeah, you guys probably don't get along. You probably, and so why is that bad? Why would, if you were a company looking to invest, what would that do to you? Wouldn't it scare you? It's unstable, it's risky, right? So alignment is super important, but it's not just alignment within your community, it's alignment to the regional groups, to your utility partners, to your state groups. I have been on tours where literally the regional guys are meeting the locals the same time I am. They're just like, oh, hi, nice to meet you, I'm Fred, you know, and it's like, don't you guys work together and stuff? So any kinds of things that are a little bit off are a huge risk to us in terms of alignment. In readiness, right? Readiness has traditionally meant product readiness. So is it shovel ready, basically, or is it certified? You know, one of those kinds of criteria in terms of the product. Increasingly, though, we're looking at, is it talent ready? Is it, you know, community ready? Is, you know, all of these other kinds of readiness. Is the zoning and planning process easy and fast and understandable? That's a key differentiator. So again, just play this out with me. You got 2 sites, two neighboring communities, let's say, similar price. One of them says, our group meets every Tuesday and it's already pre-zoned for the use that you're looking at. And so if you get us this application, which will take, you know, 10 minutes to fill out, we'll know by 3 weeks from Tuesday when they meet again what the decision is. Versus this community that says, well, it might be 1 week, but it might be 3 months, and we're not sure yet if it's going to require, you know, taking it to citizens or not. You see the contrast between those two? So certainty, uncertainty, right? Speed is really important in these, and certainty. And so to the extent that you can differentiate on time and a customer orientation, the better off you're going to be. Okay? I'm not saying don't have any zoning requirements. I'm not saying that. I'm saying make them very clear and make it very fair and customer oriented. That's what I'm saying. And that will be a differentiator. I think more than money in some sense. Think of that as another type of incentive of being really good at that. Another mega trend is ED ecosystems, this drive toward regionalism. It also means alignment and regionalism are the key success factors. And the third one is increasing competitiveness. And the story here I like to tell is like when I was a little girl, my dad was a site selector. I was second generation. And my Girl Scout leader was like, what does your dad do, right? And I'm like, I so wish sometimes he would just like be a teacher. I'm like, he's a teacher. I'm like, oh, he's a site selector. And they're like, well, what's a site selector? And I go, he helps companies figure out where to locate their businesses. Well, what does that mean? I mean, it took me like 3 Girl Scout meetings to explain to the leader what my dad did. But today, isn't there kind of a higher awareness of economic development? I mean, I think the turning point was in the last recession when President Obama did the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act, poured tons of money into economic development, and everybody started to understand what economic development was at that point. So think about this. There's between 15 and 20,000 communities in this country. There's 3,100 or so counties, parishes, boroughs, and then throw in the regions and the states. So you've got, let's say, 20,000 different entities, municipal entities. And don't you think most of them have either a community development or an economic development person? So the world today, in terms of competition, is pretty high. And differentiation means being able to explain consistently why you're a great place to live, work, and play. Why? And I'm going to go back to the school superintendent, because again, I was in one of these meetings, and community meetings, and I was talking to the school superintendent, and I said, and he said, well, this is just a great place to live, work, and play. And he said it so passionately, and I smiled, and I said, and why is that? And he looked at me, and he realized that I had him, and then he said, because there are 2 charter schools. One you can see out the window, run over here. We've got some of the best schools in the country right here. That's meaningful, right? Those things that really differentiate you. Because we've got great high school graduation rates. Because, name something else. Why is Raymore a great place to live, work, and play? What's your pitch right now? Because we have low crime. Excellent. What else? Good education. Affordability. I'm going to want more details on all those things, but those are the types of things, right? We got to get everyone in the room beyond why is it a great place to live, work, and play. Small town amenities, small town charm, big city amenities, all that. We've heard it 1,000 times, so we need some clarity on what your differentiators really are. This is a great time if anybody needs to take a little break. You want to take a break, or you want me to keep rolling? 5-minute break, 7:30. Then we only got like 4, 5, 6 hours when you get back. What's that?
You said you had slides.
I do.
Oh, okay.
Mr. Jim has them. So he can distribute them if you wish.